I want to turn now to a gentleman by the name of Augustine. Augustine is an heir to Constantine's policy of making Christianity the state religion. Augustine, by the way, is one of known as the greatest church fathers of all time in Christian history. So let me ask you this. What do you know about the church father known as St. Augustine? This is a 20th century theologian, very well known, Paul Tillich, in his book, A History of Christian Thought. Here's what he says about Augustine, who was born in a number of years after Constantine died. His life was from about 350 to about 430 AD. And here's from Paul Tillich's book, A History of Christian Thought. Now we come to the man who is more than anyone else the representative of the West. He is the foundation of everything the West has to say. Augustine lived from 354 to 430 AD, and his influence overshadows not only the next 1,000 years, but all periods ever since. This is Tillich, this is not me, this is Paul Tillich. He influenced modern philosophy in a profound way, insofar it was Platonic. Greek philosophy started the process of becoming Christian theology. He has influenced modern theology. This is someone writing within the last 50 years. Augustine has influenced modern, as in today, post-Reformation, evangelical Americanism. He has influenced modern theology as well. Augustine, in his early life, was a pagan and later became a member of the Gnostic cult known as the Manichaean cult, following a guy named Mani. And Mani was this Persian guru who was adherent to dualism, light versus darkness. Manichaeism, or Manichaeism, really became a blend of Zoroastrianism, which is an ancient Persian religion, Buddhism, and Christianity. Disciples of Mani divided the world into the elect and those who were not elect. Augustine was a member of this cult. They also believed that the elect showed themselves as such by living an aesthetic lifestyle of celibacy and separation from the material world. He left this cult opportunistically when it started to come under persecution of the Roman government. And at the time that he left his cult, guess what was on the ascendancy in the Roman Empire? Christianity. And so one of the early church fathers, Ambrose, persuaded him to join the Roman church. He left this cult and he turned to a philosophy called skepticism, a Greek philosophy, and he was very attracted to Hellenistic or Greek philosophy of Neoplatonism, which we'll talk about in a second. Here's Paul Tillich again in his History of Christian Thought. It is impossible to understand the further development of Christian theology without knowing something about Neoplatonism, the last great attempt of paganism to express itself in terms of philosophical theology. And so Augustine, steeped in this cult of Mani, with the elect and the non-elect, steeped in Greek philosophy and Neoplatonism, becomes a Christian, a leader in the state church. Neoplatonism came on the scene in post-Constantine, and it is a use of Plato's Greek philosophy about good and evil, matter being evil particularly. And it has a lot in familiar with this concept that many of you know about it called Gnosticism. Gnosticism included some of the ideas of fatalism or predestination, where the gods predetermined for all time all events, and there was no escape from those predetermined events. So Augustine, when he started to reconcile his beliefs with Christianity, he started to face an objection to the God of Israel or the God of the Old Testament. And in an attempt to kind of make it more palatable to Greek philosophy, he started to allegorize much of Hebrew Scripture. What does allegorize mean? What this text teaches plainly is changed into a type or a story about another philosophical concept which was intended by the authors. In fact, Christian theologians say this: Augustine's theology blends Gnosticism and Neoplatonism with Christian teachings. Quote, it has been said that Augustine baptized Plato. You have this not only fusion of church and state, but also Hellenism in church, Greek philosophy in church. Augustine's theology. Augustine is largely responsible for shaping the early theology of Christendom, the state church edifice. He's attributed to introducing the doctrines of predestination, allegorical interpretation, replacement theology, which we'll speak about at length, amillennialism, infant baptism, baptismal regeneration, the idea of salvation not being completed until baptism, the union of church and state, the idea of salvation through the state church. So these are key elements of Augustinian theology or early church theology. Augustine's teachings, these ideas not only were part of the 1,000 years known as the Middle Ages between Augustine and the Reformation, but they were passed on to the Reformation. Luther was an Augustinian monk. And if you were a monk in Europe, you could choose to be part of any order: Benedictine monk, Dominican monk. Luther was specifically an Augustinian monk. His guru was Augustine. Augustine played a major role in Luther's thinking. Calvin as well. Calvin so thoroughly identified with Augustinian theology that this is a direct quote from Calvin's writings. Quote from Calvin: Augustine is so wholly with me that if I wished to write a confession of my own faith, I could do so with all fullness and satisfaction to myself out of Augustine's writing. Both Calvin and Luther were heavily influenced by Augustinian theology. And as I said, he was a very strong proponent of not only replacement theology, which we'll discuss, but also infant baptism. And you'll see that when we talk about the Reformation to some degree, you'll see that the early Reformation practiced infant baptism, I guess, as a legacy of the church. And most Protestant churches today still practice this concept of infant baptism, which is very much an Augustinian concept. But Augustine's most notorious contribution to Christian theology is in replacement theology.